All right, welcome back to another episode of Obsessed with Death. If you don't mind, if you could maybe tell the people listening who you are and what it is you do.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Rob. My name's Ömer Sami. I'm a documentary filmmaker based in Copenhagen. And I've just made a short documentary called Eternal Father, about a father who has had kids late in life, and he's afraid he's not going to be able to see them grow up. So he decides to be cryonically preserved in an attempt to gain more time with the family that he loves.
Before we get into the documentary, which I'm very excited to talk about, I do like to ask everybody that I have on the podcast, and it may seem a little bit silly considering, the work that you've done in this film and obviously, you're the decision to make a film like this. But I am curious, just in your day-to-day life and sort of even before you even decided to make a film like this, what your relationship with death is like. Was it something that you thought about a lot? Is it a concern of yours? Do you think about it every day? What do you consider your relationship with death like currently?
Yeah, I mean, I'm 31 years old. I haven't had anyone close to me in my family die, besides grandparents and the kind of natural call of death. So, to be honest, it's not something that I have like a lot of firsthand experience with. This process was born out of watching my grandma, who's 92, with my niece, who's 9, and I began wondering, what does my niece think about? I think that's going to happen to my grandma. Does she think that she's approaching death? Does she think that there's an afterlife? I just became, you know, curious about understanding death through a child's eyes. And because it's not something that we talk about particularly often, and it's, I guess, a little bit of a touchy subject to like start asking someone else's kids about their view on death, which I guess I did in the film. But um, and that's what kind of began my process looking into cryonics. And to be honest with you, I think it just kind of confirmed the fact that I'm still completely in denial about my own death, and it's still a kind of abstract um, thing for me. And I had a child recently, and I think that has maybe changed something in terms of kind of how I view the miracle of life. But death still feels very distant for me. Um, NASA's preoccupation with time running out, not having enough time to do what he wants to do and to be with people that he wants to be with. That's something that I experience on a daily basis, of just like not having enough time to do all the shit that you need to do. All the books that you should have read, all the things that, all the places that you're never going to go to, and that just makes me feel kind of that can stress me out sometimes. And um, if I'm alone, like I'm eating lunch as quick as possible, I'm running upstairs. Like I think that when I'm stressed, that kind of preoccupation with that maximizing time can take over a bit. It's not particularly healthy, but I would say that's the most physical way that it manifests in my life.
That's interesting. So it's more of your relationship with death seems like it's more of just being concerned with the amount of time you have to do the things you want to do than the idea of just not existing anymore.
The idea of not existing, I think I still have the kind of uh, um, denial or youthful arrogance of being like, no, 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 like it's all good. But at the same time, like another part of my body and my mind is pulling another lever and be like, no, no. So I guess I'm split between these two.
Sure. Yeah. Where do you think that blissful ignorance comes from? I mean, you're 31. 31 is very young, in the span of a life, if we're lucky. Where do you think that blissful ignorance that, it's not something you need to worry about comes from? And can you teach me how to have that, please?
I think I'm very good at closing a mental door. Whereas my partner, will, you know, is worrying about the world that our child has been born into and all these things that are going on. Um, I think I can just kind of park that thought and just like very stubbornly focus on something else. So I'm not, and I do that, you know, as well with other things that are difficult to deal with. Like almost like, no, I'm gonna solve that later. And I think it, you know, it helps me with work to be like just focus on something, but it also manifests in less healthy ways in like personal relationships where I'm just like, you know, stubbornly not tackling the difficult things in my life. So I guess that's one coping strategy. I don't know if it's clinically recommended.
I think it doesn't seem like the unhealthiest way to live your life, right? I mean, looking at it from my perspective, where I would love to be able to just sort of almost compartmentalize things, right? Where you could just go, all right, the death thing, I'll worry about that, but I'm gonna put it in this box, and I'm not gonna look at that box for another 20 years or whatever it is.
Right, right. How does it manifest for you?
I mean, it's a constant part of my day. I mean, I think about dying, I think about death constantly. It affects almost everything I do, whether it's, you know, traveling. I mean, I have flying is absolutely terrifying to me. That
Mm-hmm.
the idea of dying in a plane crash 100% affects the way I travel and live my life and go places. 100%. The food I eat, the way, just like the way I live my life is constantly, you know, the decisions that I make, who I go see. You know, my parents are getting old. It's like, oh, I need to be spending more time. I mean, there's just so many different avenues of death that I think affect me. And then, of course, it's just a very selfish one as well, of me just being like, well, I don't want to die. So I am constantly worried about, you know, this is it's such a minor thing, right? The other day, I had a I had a minor tear in a muscle in my leg, right? So I was walking and I felt like this pop sound, and it turns out I tore a very minor tear in my leg. And immediately my brain goes, okay, a muscle tear, that's no fun, but you rest, you ice it and whatever, you're fine. That's what a normal person, I think, how their brain would go. Mine immediately goes to, oh well, I'm probably going to get a blood clot, and then the blood clot's going to go up my leg. It's probably going to go into my lungs. It's going to kill me. I mean, that's just immediately where my brain goes. Is that this very minor leg injury that probably happens to, you know, a million people, and nothing ever comes of it. But to me, I'm like, it's going to kill me. I'm going to be the one that dies from it. So it's a lot. You know, it's why I like to have these conversations and do this
Yeah.
podcast, because it helps, just even now, just like saying all of that out loud makes
Mhm.
kind of helps me realize how silly it is, you know,
Right.
and and how that, of course that's not what's going to happen. Like of course I'm going to be fine. But then it's just, you know, tomorrow there'll be something else. So
Yeah.
it's something that I definitely deal with on a day-to-day basis, but you know, I try and find ways to sort of to move past these things, and I think the conversations help a ton. And you know, things that you're creating, that other people are creating, you know, the documentary you made, to see other people who are having similar thoughts and feelings and worries about death, that helps so much.
Mm.
You know, to some people it might be silly to think, oh well, you're just watching, you know, this 30-minute documentary about someone stressing about dying. How is that helpful? But it is. It makes community. It makes me realize I'm not alone in the whole thing, you know?
Mm. Well, that's reassuring to hear that it's had that, you know, impact on you.
Yeah, you know, I wouldn't say I'm like I'm not going to watch like a horror movie, right? And where like people are
Mm.
dying. That's not the same thing. When it's like, I think a documentary is a big part of it because it's obviously real people going through, real things. So, um,
Yeah.
and I think it's so interesting. You mentioned earlier, obviously, you're in your early 30s. You haven't really had major loss yet, and you're looking at your grandmother, and you're seeing both spectrums, right? You're seeing someone very young and somebody very old, or just towards the end
Mm.
of their life, and that sort of sparked this curiosity. Um, how did this begin? What was sort of the process to get the documentary moving? Like where did that initial motivation start?
It was my graduation project from the um, Danish film school. So
Got it.
in that sense, there was, we had to make the film. There were, there's a deadline, and sometimes it's good to have those kind of deadlines where I was aware of cryonics, but when I had to kind of pitch the idea to people before I even had an idea. So just through talking about it, I just linked the thing about my grandma with cryonics. I just thought, I'm curious to find out who's chosen that option. Who, what is it? I think I had a clear idea in my head of like the kind of person that would make that decision. But I was looking to be um, surprised, and I just thought that it would be a good way of challenging our way of understanding debt. So I just began attending these closed meetings, which take place about 4 times a year in the UK. And it's quite guarded to the press because I think they've experienced people come in, gain their trust, and then just write some very cynical article. And it's like having your trousers pulled down in public. So I just attended as a normal person, just curious in it without raising a flag saying, I'm a documentary director. And for the first 3 or so, I would say it was mostly people where I got a sense quite quickly of why they might have made that decision. That life hadn't worked out the way that they intended, or they were lonely and were hoping in a second go. But at the very last meeting, I met NASA, who's the protagonist of the film, and he had brought his family along. So 4 kids, the youngest is 6, and his wife. And I thought just the fact that he had brought them along was striking and unusual. And there was a real openness and a warmth between them. And watching their faces as they watch these kind of standby procedures of like what you do and after someone is declared dead. That was, fascinating for me to see the kids experience it. And I was wondering what's going through their heads. And so that's what led me to contact him. And I knew that, I wanted to make the film about him and his family.
There is actually a massive cryogenics lab 30 minutes away from me. And I've tried to contact them. I've sent them emails. I've told them I'm coming from my approach is not to be cynical whatsoever. I'm coming from a place
Mm.
of curiosity and really just trying to learn more about it. And they've always been polite, but they're always very hesitant to speak to me because yeah, I think a lot of the times there are probably people that are looking to put some sort of negative connotation on the entire thing, or
Mm.
necessarily maybe even just talk down to them. Some people may find the entire idea silly and whatever. Look, everyone has their
Mm.
opinions. I understand that, but yeah, I think that was obviously a very smart approach on your end to sort of take the side of just a curious citizen, because
Mm.
yeah, I think the moment they find out that you're looking to document or do any sort of project that involves something like this, it does change their perception of you.
The word documentary means different things to different people. And I think if you have a kind of image of this very cynical, you know, investigative or true crime film, I understand not signing up like for that kind of thing.
Totally. Yeah, of course. It's very understandable. It is something that's a little bit out there. And
Mm.
honestly, for me, that's what intrigues me and what makes me so interested in it. But again, very very understandable. And that's what's so interesting as well. I would imagine how you felt, sort of how you explained here, going to this meeting and seeing an entire family in this meeting. I mean, for someone to think about doing this is one thing. For for their next step to be to tell their entire, to tell their wife, to tell their small children, and then bring them to a meeting. I mean, it's honestly, I think it's beautiful to have that closeness, to have that comfort, to not feel like you're going to be judged by your wife, and you feel comfortable enough. And I guess I'm just assuming all of this, but it does sort of give me the assumption that there is some comfort and confidence to be able to bring your entire family. I definitely understand what drew you to them. What was the initial outreach like? How did you approach the family and having them do this documentary?
After the meeting where we were all kind of involved in, so it's Cryonics UK is an organization that's run by volunteers, which is the standby operation. So the moment that, ideally ahead of time, if you sense that you're approaching the end of life, you would give them a heads up, and they're the ones that would turn up and do the perfusion process, draining your blood and replacing it with this antifreeze type liquid, cooling you down, putting you into a box. And they're the ones that would send you to the storage facility. So they are dependent on their own members volunteering to do this procedure for the other members. So it's both a kind of info meeting, but also a recruitment process where they're trying to secure enough people with the necessary knowledge to keep this going. And as you imagine, more people are interested in having their own body taken care of as opposed to doing it for other people. But it's cheaper to be an active member, actively participating. Afterwards, I got a sense of, this is like, we went out for a meal afterwards, all of us, and didn't mention anything. I was just soaking everything in. I was also conscious of not putting a burden on him, and there was a lot to take in that day. So I just kind of got his contact details. The contact details were exchanged, and then afterwards I reached out to him personally, and I said, I make documentaries, and I'm really interested to hear more about your thoughts on this, because that was the very first meeting that he had attended. And I'm not going to go too far down this sidetrack. I was really hoping that he was going to respond the next day, because I was in Manchester. He didn't respond, and I was like, I don't want to push too hard. So I had to go all the way back to Copenhagen. And I think the next weekend I went back. I didn't tell him any of this, but I think it's it's a complex, I don't want to push too much.
Sure.
And so he invited me to his house, and so warm and inviting. And as soon as I was there, I was like, I feel welcome here, and it feels right to be here. Whereas with some of the other people I was filming beforehand, I really felt like I was fighting is the wrong word. I felt like I was trying to get to somewhere where maybe they just didn't want to share that. Or there was, in one of the cases, just he was really conscious of is this going to be made public? Like his daughter was like, Dad, I don't want you out there on Google. If my friends, find out they were doing this, they're going to think I'm a lunatic. Like there was a lot of very fragile things, but Nasser's family and his home was just like, this feels like a place where I want to be. And there was, the fact that his wife hadn't made her mind up yet, and all of the kids' view, I thought that it's somewhere where I could genuinely go on a journey of discovery and be surprised in the process, which is important to me when making films.
When you're making a documentary like this, it seems like in other instances of people you were filming, and maybe it felt forced, whereas this didn't really seem forced at all. Like it seemed very natural.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I think when I watch documentary, I'm kind of very aware of the relationship between the director and the participants, and what is the contract that they have. It is very, very complex, and that's a whole podcast series in itself. Is
Yeah.
So that's very important to me that they also are on board with the process. And I think you can never fully understand what you're saying yes to. Like you don't know how many people are going to see it, where it's going to end up. Um, but I think like to be as transparent as you possibly can, and for them to feel like it's that they're a willing participant in it, and not doing anything against their will. And I think that was just reassuring that, like, when we didn't have the camera there, those conversations were still taking place. He was sharing his deliberations with the family. Um, and that's often what I do, is just spend a lot of time with people off camera, and then just picking up like the rituals and the kind of things that they're talking about, and think like, okay, maybe we could film a scene where they're talking about this.
Yeah, so it seems like your approach is almost there's value as much off camera as there is on camera.
Absolutely. I think that when I started making films, I had this kind of frenzy. I need to just film everything. I don't want to miss a single moment. And I think the reality is that you're always going to miss a moment. And also being more comfortable with just registering, like, okay, there's something that he's mentioned about his mum. I'll make a mental note of that, and then that's something I can think of a setting, or of a place where um, the the scene also adds something to, or a discussion. Like, I haven't heard him talk about it with his son. Maybe they could have a discussion, and that's kind of how I would work. And I think that spending time with people is a very important part of gaining their trust, gathering, making it a mutual bond, and also giving something of yourself. Like, I think there's something strange of just going somewhere and taking something from someone. Like, you also need to kind of, you know, give something of yourself. It's not a friendship, of course. It's something different than that, but it is like any other relationship. Like, at some point, if you're just coming and taking and taking and taking and then leaving, that's not good for anyone.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I think that may be a part of what makes certain people nervous to go on camera, right? And share whatever part of their life you're asking them to share. Is
Mhm.
if you're not willing to do the same on some level, I think that maybe would cause some trust issues.
Yeah.
What's going to happen when you're done filming, and then now you have all this footage and you can sort of edit it into whatever you want. I think having that trust is probably a big part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm curious. It seems like, this was obviously a project for school. This is something that, as you said, had a deadline. So this was something that needed to be made. Do you feel like your opinion or your thoughts on this type of procedure, I don't know if procedure is the right word,
Mm.
but just, cryonics in general, do you feel like after spending time with the family and sort of documenting the process, did your opinion on it change? I mean, is it something that you would consider doing later in life yourself? How did that relationship sort of uh, you know evolve through making the documentary?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I went into it, as many people do, with this idea of, um, it's mostly billionaires that are able to do this. That it was, I think, on a surface level, it's quite shocking, the thought of your body being frozen. It's hard to grasp, really. And I think the more time I've spent, um, I've realized that it's actually mostly very normal people, who, if you saw them on the street, you would have no idea that they had made this decision. Most people pay for it through life insurance. So if you start early enough, it could be about £20 a month, $25. If you don't die in the right circumstance, say you die in a car crash, your body can't be preserved. That money is paid out to your family, or whoever. So um, I think, in that sense, it's not a scam, and most people are that I've spoken to are very aware of the risks that it's it's almost like an opportunistic decision. It's like the other two options, burial and cremation, well, that's just a definite end. And this is the kind of one possibility, at least for NASA, that it's like, this is better than nothing. And I'm gonna take the risk. And if there's 0.01%, that's still better than the 0.0. Um, and that I do understand. I
Yeah, me too. I
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the best argument for it, right? Is like, well, you're at least there's still a chance. There's literally no chance with any other option. This is the only option that gives you some sort of chance.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, are you signed up?
I'm not. No, I'm not, but I'm not against it. I was completely unaware of the insurance aspect of it. I very much was on the end of the spectrum of this is for extremely wealthy people. This is not something anybody could do.
Right.
I'm telling you, I learned a ton from your documentary, and I I'm not against it. I don't know what
Mm,
I want. I've definitely always sort of had in the back of my mind the very typical funeral. I liked the idea of just being being in one place where people could come visit me. And but
mm,
I would like to live a very long time, and
mm.
if there's an opportunity to come back down the road, I that is very appealing to me. But
Yeah.
I still don't know. Yeah.
Well, I think the interesting thing with the funeral is that there is a kind of underwritten ritual. It's something that we're familiar with,
Yeah.
and that's comforting for a lot of people. And in the film, what I'm interested in is how his decision affects his family. I mean, in some sense, he's made up his mind. Like this discussion that we're having of the rationalization is one part of it, which is quite easy to understand. But I think the consequence for some people is the lack of closure that it then gives to the people around you or out. Yeah, if they can't come and visit you physically in a graveyard, like how are you commemorated? How are you ritualized? And I think that's the part that we haven't figured out yet. Um, it's just like an ellipses, like and psychologically, I don't know if like it's quite hard to deal with someone not being there, but maybe still being there in some way or form.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you really wanted to, you could still have the procedure and then also still have a funeral. I mean,
Mm,
I guess you could, and you could still get, you could still get a plot of land, or if you wanted some sort of headstone, if you wanted there to be a place that people could go that maybe they're not necessarily quote unquote visiting you, but they're going to a
mm,
place to remember you. And this is the place that you're, designated to do that. I guess
mm,
that's something you could work out. But I think that a big part of why cemeteries exist is because people want to know this is where you were laid to rest, and this is
mm,
where I'm going to come see you. And I think there is a big part of that. But again, yeah, I think as maybe we evolve and people are more comfortable to have these sort of conversations about death and
mm.
dying and what happens with your body afterwards, that maybe certain people could figure that out. I don't know. It is a very complex thing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, um, Alan Sinclair, who is the kind of pioneer in the UK, when his wife died, they had both made a pledge to both be frozen in order to kind of reunite in the future. And I'm currently making a short film about him for The Guardian. Um, and when she died, he didn't really want to hold the funeral, but that her family really couldn't understand that. So I guess there's also the question of who you do these things for. And so he, did hold the funeral more for her family's sake. But I think if you really like, he's at least at that point in time was like pretty hardcore believer. Like she's not dead. Like this is a pause. in the timeline.
Yeah.
So I think that was kind of, he struggled to go on board with that fact of speaking about her as if she were ever going to come back.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Oh, well, that's interesting. So it looks like you're making a second documentary now that's going to sort of still keep in this realm of cryonics.
Yes, yeah. As behind the window that we're speaking in Zoom, I'm making an export of the film. Like I'm in post production on it. Yeah,
Very exciting.
yeah. It's very different tonally and stylistically, but still within the cryonics. Probably more, explicitly about cryonics than
Yeah.
Eternal Father.
Well, that's very exciting. I can't wait to watch that.
It'll be on the Guardian at some point later this year.
Okay. Yeah, great. Well, definitely. I mean, please keep me in the loop with that. Obviously, I'd love to share, wherever, I would love to post about it and let people know. And
Thank you.
yeah, make sure people watch, and I'm very excited to watch as well. Um, it's been great talking with you. We're getting close on time here. I was excited that you were interested in coming on the podcast. Like I said, I watched the documentary. I really loved it. If you want to send people somewhere, where's the best place? I know there's a few different places they could go to watch it, but if people haven't checked out the documentary, where could we send them to?
It's on the New Yorker's channel on YouTube.
All right. So best place is just go into the New Yorker YouTube channel and they'll be able to find it that way.
Exactly. Yeah, it's free to watch and publicly available.
Great. And then obviously you can follow you on Instagram as well. That's probably a great place to get updates on this next documentary that's coming out as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. And of course, all this stuff, if you're listening to this episode right now, check the show notes. I'll have links to everything. I'll put a link to the YouTube channel and all that stuff so people can go check it out. But hey, this has been really great. I really appreciate you, coming on the show, and I'd love to have you back on again. We'll see. I'll watch. I can't wait for this next documentary. Maybe we'll have you back on. We'll talk about that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me, Rob.
Of course, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Take care.